and me would not think of a haunted graveyard as a good place to find shelter, but you and me, I'm guessing, have homes. The homeless man didn't, and on a night like that, you get roofs, you get walls, you get doors, and in the morning, you get some privacy. It's not completely without logic, so we'll let him away with that. What is harder to let him away with is that of all the tombs in this haunted graveyard, he walked directly over to George Mackenzie's. Now it's got a sturdy roof, it's got solid walls, it's got big oak doors and windows in them. And peering through the windows, you can see that there is an access shaft to the burial chambers 2 stories down. So as far as shelter goes, yes, it's lovely. But it's been haunted since 1691 by a violent poltergeist. And for some reason, this nutter decided to focus on the positives. He shoulder barged his way through the doors, breaking them on their hinges. He propped them closed behind himself, lifted the grill on the floor, and descended into the chambers beneath. In the burial chamber, which he found was very well sheltered, he also found there were 4 mysterious wooden caskets, inscribed with the names of George Mackenzie, his wife, his son, and his daughter. You and me would probably think, I'm in a graveyard. I'm in a tomb. I'm in the burial chamber. I'll bet those are coffins. I'll leave them alone. But this guy claims he thought they were firewood. I rather suspect he wondered if Mackenzie had been buried with any interesting jewellery, but that's just speculation. He decided he really had to open one of them. He pried loose a slab of stone flooring, hauled it up onto his shoulder and hammered it down on George Mackenzie's coffin. He broke the coffin lid open and for some reason was startled to find a corpse inside. He staggered backwards and stood where he just pulled the floor up, so he fell through the floor, hit himself in the head on the way down, and was knocked out. He came to sometime later, under Mackenzie's tomb, somewhere dark and wet. Quick historical sidetrack. Whenever the plague broke out in Edinburgh, there were 3 very simple but very important rules of corpse disposal. Rule 1, dig a hole. Rule 2, cram them in. Rule 3, don't tell anyone. Plague victims lower house prices. For that reason, it is and always has been illegal to mark where plague victims are buried. As a result, whenever we dig anything in Edinburgh, we tend to find plague victims. Under Mackenzie's tomb, there were 37 of them, in various stages of decomposition, and the homeless man was up to his neck in rotting flesh. He lit his lighter and immediately wished that he had not, because now he could see what he had landed in. He gasped in terror and immediately wished that he had not, because now he could tell you what it tasted like. He started to gag, vomit, bleed, run, scream in one truly unimaginable movement. Jumping out the massive dead bodies, he grabbed the collapsed floor, hauled himself up to the burial chamber and started to vomit. He pulled himself up to the next chamber and vomited all over it. He threw himself up to the main chamber, kicked the doors open and staggered out into the dark, stormy night, howling obscenities at the cruel skies, gasping for clean air and vomiting uncontrollably in all directions. Just as poor old Graham walked by. Graham was a retired security guard, earning money for the Church of Scotland by patrolling the graveyard. On a dark, stormy night, as he wandered past the most haunted tomb on earth, the door flew open. Out staggered a humanoid covered in rotting flesh, vomiting and swearing. So, Graham figured, this is it. The dead are rising, and it's Zombie Mackenzie. He threw his torch at the homeless man and ran for his life. The dog that he was patrolling with ran the other way, because this zombie could only chase one of them. The zombie chased the one throwing torches at it. For half an hour, 68-year-old Graham was chased around the graveyard by what he honestly believed to be the walking corpse of a 17th century Scottish nobleman. After which the police were summoned.
Bloody Jerry, Bloody Jerry, Bloody Jerry, Bloody Jerry, Bloody Jerry, Bloody Jerry.
You know, it was bloody Jan who scheduled the tour so close together. Please send your complaints to the creepy wee gift shop, Greyfriars Kirkyard, Edinburgh, City of the Dead Tours, Jan Henderson. I've forgotten where I was. I'll begin again. Welcome! After half an hour, the police were brought by Graham's frantic screams and everything is sorted out. But the next day, reports came in of people being scratched in the Covenanters prison. A few days later, people reported being pushed and hearing voices in the Covenanters prison. And exactly 7 days after that desecration had occurred, we had the first person knocked out unconscious, directly outside this tomb. She was an Austrian student visiting some of the more notable doctors buried in this part of the Covenanters prison. Exactly 7 days later, the next knockout occurred, further up where my awful brother has gone. It happens much more commonly here, so I've got the best bits. This happened every 7 days for about a month, after which the council closed the gates and we've been the only ones coming in. Now, in that time, we've been documenting. We've been trying to figure out what this thing is and trying to see what it does and what it can do. And we don't have very many findings, for the reason that I've explained. I believe the universe behaves itself when it's being observed. And when it's not being observed, that's when things get complicated. But in here, light and dark don't seem to make a difference. But we can yet tempt fate. Because this thing used to attack children. Only children. Only boys. And only when they taunted him. There was a particular phrase they used to shout, which without fail got one of them knocked out. Just before we finish up, because Edinburgh City Council does not let us spend any longer than 12.5 minutes in this mausoleum, bloody health and safety, I could shout that phrase. What do you think?
Yeah.
Excellent. Now this comes from 1691, so it does sound a wee bit odd, but there you go. Bloody Mackenzie, come out if you dare! Unsnack the locks, come up the stair! Ladies and gentlemen, things do not always happen. Whenever anything genuine does happen, whoever it happens to tends to get dragged out the gates, covered in blood and completely traumatised. If you really wish that that had happened to you, visit Glasgow. Now, I have pushed this as far as we go and have actually now spent 14 minutes in this tomb. Don't tell the council. However, they do insist that we don't spend too long in here because they've decided that length of time in here makes a difference. So, is anybody unconscious?
Me.
Counting up now, what we're going to do is step outside the tomb. We'll make our way to the gates of the Covenanters prison, and I'm running 5 minutes over, which is not bad, but I might try and make that worse by running even further over. We'll see how it goes. Mind your step. We'll gather outside before we head to the gates, so just sort of mind your step.